that's important here to build upon what Kim has said is that Putin misread the United States and what the United States would be doing vis-a-vis Ukraine. The fact that the United States supported Ukraine in this way was a very significant move. The strengthening of the alliances, that is absolutely a key component of Biden's legacy. One of the things, perhaps on the other side of the balance sheet might be this, that while those alliances focus on physical and kinetic power and also an economic power, they don't specifically address issues, at least they haven't in the public realm, of things like cybersecurity and the fact to protect intellectual property like artificial intelligence. He certainly mentioned artificial intelligence quite a bit in these remarks, but the key thing going forward is going to be that this is basically Biden's defense of the Pax Americana, the fact that the United States, from the end of World War II up until the present point in time, has basically held sway over a large portion of the world. Yes, there have been issues like Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, all of these things have come up during this time, and there certainly were perturbations since 9/11. But the very fact that we've had a basically stable relationship with other rival countries like Russia, like China, is critically important, and President Biden definitely alluded to the fact that they've managed that quite extensively and prevented it from really becoming a major conflict.
I mean, his thesis really is that our foreign adversaries are much weaker than they were before he came into office. That seemed to sort of be the common theme across every specific issue he spoke about, whether it was from Iran, Russia, and China, but of course the change of regime in Syria as well. I want to bring in MJ Lee, who's at the White House for us, because MJ, we were talking before this speech about some of the progress made in the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. We heard from the president that he'd spoken to the Emir of Qatar as well, but also with Benjamin Netanyahu, which I believe was the first, at least publicly announced, conversation they had in quite some time. I wonder if, given what we have heard so much so far come out from this deal as well, did we get a sense for how much they wanted to emphasize United States involvement in what was going on between Israel and Hamas, and potential optimism for a future in regards to any ceasefire?
Yeah, it was interesting actually, given all of our reporting on how optimistic U.S. officials are feeling today about the possibility of getting this deal in place in Gaza. President Biden actually didn't spend a ton of time talking about the mechanics of that deal. He did say that ceasefire deal is on the brink of finally coming to fruition. He said U.S. officials are going to continue pressing hard to close the deal. So certainly went right up to the line of suggesting that this could happen in the coming days, but really this was not a speech that was going to get into the machinations of how those negotiations have been going. And Omar, just in the big picture, I completely agree with you. I mean, this very much sounded like, as we had expected, a foreign policy victory lap speech on everything from how the U.S. has handled itself when it comes to Ukraine and Iran and the degradation of its capabilities, on China. He was saying, when I first got into office, everybody was saying it was inevitable that China's economy would at some point surpass America's. And he said at this point, that is just not going to happen. Talking about Afghanistan, I was a little surprised how glancingly he mentioned the fact that U.S. service members had died in the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. But nevertheless, he did say it was important to him that he keep his promise of ending the presence of American forces there and not handing off that war to his successor. But I will say, as we are talking about in the big picture, this victory lap that he is taking on foreign policy and trying to cement his legacy, I think we just have to be realistic about the fact that, if it is President Biden's right to make this kind of a speech, it is also incoming President Donald Trump's right to ignore every piece of advice that President Biden might be trying to give him. On Ukraine, he said, we can't walk away now. On China, he said it is better for the U.S. to deal with China alongside its alliances and allies. President Trump doesn't have to do anything with that. And I think that is going to be a reality that President Biden, of course, knows very well, and is going to be a bitter pill for him to swallow, given that he didn't want to be passing the baton back to Donald Trump.
Yeah. such a good point, MJ and David, that MJ makes there. This is going to be quite a turn because I think he said something that I think a lot of people agree with, Democrats and Republicans, which is that there's a sense that America is at an inflection point. There's a lot of fear about what is around the corner when it comes to competition with China and these flashpoints that we look at that he covered. And as we make the turn here in the U.S. from the Biden administration into the Trump administration, it is going to be very, very different.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, think about the whole frame of the speech. It's about what he inherited from the previous Trump administration and how he believes he brought it to better standing, both economically in terms of the global economy and in terms of the nation's security. So he's already in the frame of that speech, not just tying a bow around his legacy, which you would expect any president to do at the end of their term, but in contrast to what was handed to him, and he's handing it back to those same people, or at least the same president, and maybe some other people will populate it. But it's hard to think about this moment without recognizing, I mean, listen, I don't consider myself a spring chicken, right? Joe Biden has been in Washington at the center of foreign policy debates and policymaking for longer than I've been alive. And when you think about that, 52 years ago, a 30-year-old senator was starting out. And here he is in his preferred milieu, right? The State Department, and as he even referenced, chair of Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 8 years as vice president, 4 years as president. This is the stuff that animates Joe Biden's public career, probably more so than anything else, domestically or politically. This is the stuff that has been the real life force of his public life. And so seeing him in this moment to try and, of course, put his spin on it as to why he believes he was a good steward, is a moment that I think, as you know, we're going to have a farewell speech from him in the Oval Office on Wednesday night. We're going to see him a little bit more this week. And then, of course, he's participating in all the formal tea at the White House and ride up to Capitol Hill for the inauguration to attend his successor's inauguration because he believes in those traditions and institutions. But this speech was one that he hopes will be left with the history writers.
And I want to quote, because it's relevant, from his USA Today interview with Susan Page. I think the only advantage of being an old guy is that I've known every major world leader for a long time. And I think that's fair to say. He was trying to bring that to the forefront there. And look, one of the countries and dynamics we've been talking about a lot is Ukraine and Russia. I want to bring in Fred Pleiken, who's reported extensively from Ukraine over the course of this war. And Fred, one of the lines that the president had in that speech is that I'm the only one that stood in the center of Kyiv, not him, in regards to Vladimir Putin, of course. It might not be a new sentiment, even if it's maybe a new line, but for you, you've reported on the ground extensively with troops, Ukrainian troops. That sentiment, how is that translated to morale, to the president's office in what has been, we know, a grueling, ongoing war with Russia?
A grueling ongoing war, Omar, and certainly when it's becoming more and more difficult for the Ukrainians. And I think that President Biden is, of course, right, that he was the only one who was standing there in that square in Kyiv. But at the same time, while there has been a lot of aid from the United States, while no doubt the Biden administration has also enabled a lot of NATO allies to do things that they never thought they'd be capable of doing. If you look at, for instance, where I am right now in Berlin, the Germans, they started out in all this offering 5,000